Harsanyi time. It's our friend David Harsanyi from National Review. He's a senior writer at National Review. Does a lot of great pieces over there, and we're always appreciative to have him join us. David, good to see you.
Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So, I've been talking about normalcy today and how the new normal is apparently treating your political opponents like members of the most vicious totalitarian terrorist organization of modern life, Al-Qaeda. It means signing a whole bunch of executive orders that are right in line with the far left-wing agenda of the Democrat Party, the furthest left members, things like the Green New Deal, and also results on COVID where everyone looks around and says, hold on a second. So you guys, the Democrats didn't actually have some great plan here. They weren't the smartest people in the room ready to fix everything. What are you making of all this?
Yeah, I mean, we learned quite quickly that Biden had no real plan, to change the trajectory of COVID. And in fact, he said, I have no plan to change the trajectory of COVID in the next few months. He said that a few days ago. Meanwhile, when you look back at the campaign literature, he literally uses the word trajectory and how he was going to change it and how only Democrats can change it. So there is no plan. He tried to pretend that he had some sort of special vaccine distribution plan, which was the same as the Trump plan. Essentially, his plan is the Trump plan. There's nothing there that we haven't been doing other than him signing some executive orders that, pressure governors to engage and to adopt mask-wearing policies that almost all of them do, including in the one he signed on federal buildings. None of this is new. Obviously, Fauci's now talking about 2 masks and so on, but I mean, there's really nothing new here. So, and as you mentioned, he's adopted all these far left-wing ideas without any consensus, joining the Paris Accords without going to the Senate, as Obama did. He's ruling by fiat, and that did not work out for Obama. He might have been personally popular, but he lost 900 seats. And if Biden goes this way, I think that the Republicans are going to have a good chance of winning back the Senate and the House, and we'll be back to where we were before Trump.
I do think that there's perhaps not necessarily a widespread buyer's remorse yet among Democrats, but for any independents out there, for any people who are among the persuadables who believed, because I still think to this day that one of the most potent narratives for Biden's election win was that Donald Trump it's not that Trump didn't do a great job leading us during COVID, but that he was actually somehow personally responsible for a large amount of the COVID deaths. This was the media story. I mean, they would say this. I played the clips on this show many times. Night after night, it was, because of Trump's example, people are dying. Because of what Trump... And now we look all over the world, and this thing has just been devastating for whether it's countries in Europe, China, Brazil has had a horrible time with this, and countries all over the world of similar population and density have been crushed by this thing. So I guess it wasn't all Trump's fault, David. And I think that some people might just be waking up to that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Trump bears some responsibility in the way he handled it, because a lot of it, as we saw with Andrew Cuomo, is how you present yourself, right? So Cuomo was the worst governor in the country. He made the biggest mistake in coronavirus, and yet, he was lauded, yet he wrote a book, yet he was on national TV, yet he, won an Emmy. Where Trump, who I think did a better job than Cuomo in general, though there's only so much power the president has, was, personally, I mean, Biden said he was personally responsible for these deaths. Whereas the variation on fatality rates in Western countries is essentially, they're not the same, but they're in the same ballpark because of, other forces. As you mentioned, the virus doesn't care about if you're socialist, if you have socialized medicine, if you're free, if you're capitalistic society, it does not care. And the idea that we were going to somehow contain this in the way that they hoped, outside of trying to not overwhelm hospitals, has been a joke. As we see with Sweden now, whose numbers are better than places like Belgium and and basically the same as the UK, which has consistently had lockdowns, and Sweden didn't have any, really.
Right. Well, as I've been telling everybody, the whole debate has been set up in a way that's false, because it's either a lockdown that's a real lockdown is people cannot leave their homes for a period of time. You cannot go to other households. You have extreme limitations. They did this in Italy. They've done this in other places for a period of time where you can't leave town. You can't travel. and you can only go to the store to get food, and you can only go to the drugstore to get medicine. That's it, right? We never really did that. So what we've had is, well, let's shut down restaurants and bars and some places, but all this other stuff, people are still going in, essential workers and grocery stores and big box. That's all still happening. And so the virus is spreading in those places. Like we've been led to believe that we were doing what other places that have had some success dealing with this, like New Zealand and Australia, which are tiny islands with far smaller populations. We never did really what they did. And we certainly never did it on a nationwide scale. And David, it's because we would have rejected it. No, people wouldn't have said, yeah, sure. I'm going to stay in my apartment. I'm going to stay in my home for 30 or 60 days on pain of imprisonment. I don't think that would have flown here.
No, I think initially when we were unsure of what was going on, people were scared for good reasons, and they didn't know what was happening, and they were willing to abide by rules like that on, they're just being
look,
asked
I did.
to do it.
I was all in favor of, not to interrupt you, David, but 2 weeks to let hospitals get ready for this thing, and I was like, okay, we can do that for 2 weeks, and that seemed reasonable. But what happened after that, as we know, was very different.
I was too. Yeah. I mean, I didn't know. I don't know. I'm not a medical expert. I don't know how to deal with this, but I am not also, I'm not blind, right? And after a year now, almost, I see the results, and I can look at other countries, and I can see how it's worked and hasn't worked. And I can see which states are doing well and which states aren't doing well. And you can compare New York and Florida and how they reacted to it. Now, obviously, there's weather differences, there's societal differences, but in the end, Florida has been better in every single quantifiable measure than New York, and they were far more permissive than New York, and they dealt with it better than New York. Now, I think that we should take lessons from that, but everything's been so politicized now, and there's no way back for a lot of people. They have to pretend that that mask wearing is some panacea. They have to pretend that we have to that we can never move forward again. I think it's dangerous. It's dangerous to civil liberties, and it's dangerous to actual science if you are a natural skeptic like I am. And I think that that's what people need to be when they're told stuff. Doesn't mean that they need to, not believe the experts, but there need to be questions, and those questions need to be answered. And that hasn't happened. We have Fauci lying to us on multiple occasions, as we've discussed, and others as well. And now we have Biden, who lied to us through the entire campaign, saying he could change the trajectory, saying he could save us from the darkness, or whatever, over the top language he used. And none of that's true. It didn't matter if it was Biden or Trump, frankly. On this,
and we're speaking to David Harsanyi. He's a senior writer at National Review. You can read his latest at nationalreview.com. You brought up natural skepticism, and I just think it's troubling to watch how not only, I think the media has always pretended, right? There are tensions with speaking truth to power. Well, it turns out if you actually want to advance your career in the media, a lot of the time you want to be a handmaiden of power. I mean, you want to be close to the people that give you the interviews and give you the access, and that's a huge problem with political journalism. It has been for a very long time. I think people might be more aware of it now, at least those with open eyes, than they were before. But just in general, the lack of skepticism from the press over COVID, and when it comes to experts, I mean, I sit around and I would be willing to have a debate with anybody about Fauci's mask pronouncements. I'm not sitting around pretending like I understand the aerodynamics of virology through masks and whatever, but I know when someone says something that's BS. I know when someone lies to you or goes back on that. I do know as well as any scientist, any doctor. Like, they don't have some special ability to sift through that. In fact, I think I'm better at it than they are. And, Fauci, last week it was 2 masks. And I know people say this is a small thing, but I don't think it's a small thing. It's 2 masks is clearly more effective. And then Osterholm comes out and says, well, actually 2 masks are less effective than having just 1 mask. And then Fauci says, well, there's no data for 2 masks, so I guess maybe we can't say that. And now he's saying, well, there's no harm in 2 masks, and there's some data, and we'll look at more data. I mean, the guy's he's just making it up as he goes along. That's obvious. And this is in the last week.
That's one of the problems, just more broadly speaking, about, follow the science. We will let science guide us. 2 problems with that. First of all, there's no such thing. Science is constantly being challenged, and it's not some, solid immovable object, but B, I don't want to follow the science quite often because there are a million other trade-offs I have to think about. Sure, we could lock down like the bubble boy, each of us, and never give a disease to anyone else, and we could all live happily ever after until we die of lack of exercise or whatever it is. And but the fact is, there are a million other things we need to think about. Fauci is not a constitutional scholar. What he says about getting together in religious services means zero to me because he has no say in that, even if there is a disease. We had the Hong Kong flu, and I was just happened to read something, and they mentioned the Hong Kong flu. I think it was like 69 or something like that. 100,000 or more people died. We don't really even know. And it was not even really that big an issue in the sense of, coverage, because this must have happened quite often. But not a single person ever thought that they would just be able to just give dictatorial powers, at least not from what I can tell, to governors to shut down the entire country. This is a completely new thing. And paired up with the illiberalism of many people on the left, it's become somewhat of a scary thing to me because they are taking power and no one pushes back. The only people who occasionally stop them are the courts. And the people, frankly, don't even seem to care very much in most places. So that I think bodes poorly for our future in many ways for the pro-civil rights.
And I think we're having a moment here where there's a bit of an opening, David, because there's this recall effort against Gavin Newsom in California. There's this New York Times piece on 9 senior health experts fleeing Governor Cuomo. It was really the states. The states have police power, and they do have, essentially public health power, right? The states in this country, those are realms of particular authority for them, even more so than the federal government. And the results that you see from the states that took the most extreme positions are abysmal. And there's no arguing about this now. When you brought up Florida, I keep telling people, because I'll get, smug people on social media. Well, actually, if you look at, this 30-day window or that 60-day period, New York was 5% lower for cases than Florida. I'm looking at them saying, Florida's open. New York is shut down. People have lost thousands and thousands of businesses. Their lives are ruined. And you're going to talk to me about a 2 or 3% temporary case reduction of something that, it's just like no one thinks anymore, David. We've become a country of sheep.
Yeah, and this is what Paul Krugman and others do. They'll pick a spot on the graph that works for them, and then they'll ignore all the other times and spots, especially when it comes to places like Florida and Texas. Listen, in the end, New York has a 12% of their nursing home population died because of COVID. In Florida, which has a much bigger elderly population and has more people in general, I think 2 million more people than New York now, had a under 2% fatality rate. That is not some small discrepancy. That's huge. It's 10%. And in every way, Florida handled it better. But people will say, look at this, South Dakota is doing so poorly now. They haven't listened. But then you see a spike in New York and then they don't say anything. It's clear to me that every time people pop out of their houses and want to get back into life, this spreads again. I hope the vaccine helps us, alleviate this and that we can move forward. But we need to move forward no matter what happens in the end. We just have to try to protect certain populations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I often say that hypocrisy is a defining or a foundational characteristic of being a Democrat in America today. But I would just add one onto this. I wanted your sense, your reaction to this. I do also think that there's a kind of political, cultural, intellectual arrogance that comes along with being this is with the whole, I believe science thing, that people who don't read anything, never mind scientific journals, who really are deeply ignorant, but they checked a few boxes on went to a certain kind of school or something. They really do believe that they're smarter, and then all these people, Joe Biden and the people around him, are so much smarter. It's just not true.
Yeah, I've been in journalism for a while, and when you start out, you're in awe of certain people. You think about certain institutions in a way, you admire them, whatever it is, and then you're in them, and you're like, man, these people aren't as smart as I thought, right? These people are no smarter than me, most of them, and that's now we're in the middle somewhere of the intellectual spectrum, right? So. And then Twitter comes around, and then you realize, oh my God, a lot of people who run things are just idiots. You know what I mean? I'm not calling him an idiot exactly, but Andy Slavitt, who is now like the senior advisor on COVID, has tweets out saying that Cuomo had handled COVID better than anyone in the country, that he is basically a genius, that he never took credit, that he he did everything correct. And now you're like, their fatality rate is second highest in New Jersey in the country. Everything is terrible. And he does not pay a price for that or anything. He is in fact rewarded for that. So I don't know how we can keep going this way when no one trusts institutions like journalism, which is completely corrupt these days, frankly. And I don't know how you go forward, but what Twitter has done and what social media has done is shown us that these people are not any smarter than an average person. Maybe they have different expertise, et cetera. But as far as just living life and common sense and going about their daily business, these people live in the clouds often, and they have all the power. And one last thing on this, I often argue with folks who think that big tech is the main problem and big businesses, and I completely sympathize with many of their thoughts, but they don't have guns. They don't have laws. It's very difficult for them to put you out of business, to shut you down, to keep you at home, to not let you go worship. Government can still do all those things, and they did during COVID. And there was no pushback, and they did whatever they wanted. And that again, to me, is something that I'm really nervous about moving forward, because as you say, they talk now like this is a forever problem. Like 10 years from now, it's not going to be normal. My kids are going to have to wear double masks just to go outside. I mean, I don't want that kind of world. You've mentioned it before. It's dehumanizing, but it's also an infringement on people's individual rights. So I'm a little worried about that, but we'll see. I think there's a backlash coming because of Biden's sort of, ruling by fiat and pen. And I don't think people are going to like that.
And also people are realizing Joe Biden, no surprise to anybody who is smart, Joe Biden's not that smart, folks. Okay, he's actually not smarter than Trump. I know we were all told that. It's not true. So
Joe Biden,
we'll get to that another day.
Joe Biden is like he's some old man who's lost his bearings, and he has to some extent. Don't get me wrong; he's incoherent quite often, but he's been this way. I'm 51 years old now, and I've seen him for a long time, and he's never been coherent, right? And he's always been kind of a goofball, and it's hard to believe he's actually president. Now, obviously, Trump made a lot of mistakes, et cetera, but these were not, and you say buyer's remorse, but yeah, that kind of buyer's remorse really shows itself in midterms. So that's what, for him,
that's where we got to focus.
It's a big word.
That's where we got to focus. We got to stop these Democrats from being crazy. NationalReview.com for David Harsanyi's latest. David, as always, thank you, sir.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, Team Buck, thank you so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you like this video, please click that little thumbs up button so then it will log as liked. And also, if you want to see more great content from The First, please click subscribe.